talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to Connecticut.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Basically, I'm back for vacation at this point. So I was off last week. Did give you guys some content. I dropped my college football playoff picks a week ago for the podcast feed. I did my over-unders. Did not share it yet on YouTube, but I will get to that later in the fall. But football is here. It's game week. Week 0 is coming up. And we got ourselves a jam-packed episode of the Air Torres Pod. It is so good to be back. I ain't going anywhere, probably, frankly, until after the Final Four and college basketball portal season. So if you like Torres, if you hate Torres, no matter how you feel, just get ready because we ain't going anywhere. We're full speed ahead, mostly football, but we will get to some basketball when needed. Speaking of which, today, football, lot of football to discuss. And what we're going to do is something a little bit different. As I said, we did our over-unders and our college football playoff picks a week ago. Today, what I want to do is actually go through the college football hot seat, okay? Think this is an interesting thing this time of year. Some people like talking about it. Some people don't. Well, Torres, I'm not one of those guys that says you never talk about another man's job. To me, I think it's an interesting topic. We'll talk about the big names that are on it, what they need to do to survive, all that good stuff. From there, we'll get to a couple other odds and ends from the football schedule while I was gone. You know, little Will Howard at Ohio State. Tennessee picks up another 5-star. And then we will switch gears to basketball because to me, I know we're trying to get out of basketball, but stuff keeps happening. On Friday, Kentucky added 4-star Malachi Moreno. And over the course of the last couple of days, I've gotten some interesting intel on another player that you need to know. Jasper Johnson, 5-star from Kentucky. He wasn't really trending towards Kentucky, but I will tell you, it does feel like to me, he could be headed back to Kentucky. Bring it up to say, before we get started, sorry, I got to send a quick text here really quick. We're having some technical issues. Give me 1/2 second. All right. Sorry about that. I will edit that out of the back office. But with that said, so before we get started, a couple quick things. One, make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast YouTube channel. Sorry for that little delay, little technical issue here on the back office. But bring it up because we are full speed ahead, as I said, with football. A lot of football to get into, ton to discuss. Make sure that you're subscribed. Also, make sure to rate and review the show on podcast. If you are not subscribed on podcast, please make sure to do so as well. Apple, Spotify, etc. With that said, we are full speed ahead with football. There is no more time to waste. So let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, listen, as I know I've said 2-3 times now, if you missed it last week, we covered a lot of ground even while I was gone. We did my college football playoff picks. We also, by the way, dropped my favorite over-under win total bets on the Aaron Torres Pod YouTube feed. We have our college football betting feed where we've been previewing individual teams. But I just bring it up to very simply say this. The season is here, and one thing that some media is afraid to talk about, I'm certainly not, that is always fascinating to you guys and girls is the hot seat. And so we've done the fun stuff, our playoff previews. It's time to get a little serious, kind of talk about this hot seat, where we are, which schools could potentially be looking for new head coaches, who might not be. Like I said, a couple things. One, I've heard other people in the media, and listen, I'm not here to criticize other media members, but some will say, oh, you never talk about another man's job. I don't really buy into that. If you're not good at your job, if you're making millions of dollars a year and you're not performing, we're going to talk about it. But what I would also say about this particular cycle in the hot seat cycle, coaching carousel cycle, does feel like it's a little bit quieter than most years. And in my opinion, listen, there's a couple reasons why that is. There's certainly been a lot of turnover at the highest level. Alabama, Nick Saban retires, whatever. But I just bring it up because it feels like it's going to be quiet. But the one thing, and I've been doing this for years now, is that as you get closer to the season, you start to think, okay, there's no way that this job's going to open or that job's going to open. And as time goes on, stuff just changes, right? So like, it doesn't feel like it's going to be a crazy cycle. But what happens if Ryan Day loses to Michigan again? What happens if Ohio State maybe makes the playoff, but they're a 10 seed and they lose on the road at Ole Miss in the first weekend of the playoff? You know, so there's just a lot that can happen. Lincoln Riley at USC, he's not getting fired, but like Ryan Day probably won't get fired even if Ohio State loses to Michigan again. But could he try to sneak off to the NFL? I don't know. Same with Lincoln Riley. What if Lincoln Riley and USC not only lose to LSU in week 1, not only lose to Michigan in their opener in the Big Ten? What if they start losing to the Nebraskas of the world? What if they start losing to the Wisconsins of the world? What if all of a sudden they're going to that Notre Dame game at 7-6 overall, or I guess it'd be 5-6, and they're barely bowl eligible? So the point I'm trying to make: stuff happens, things change. I don't think a Lincoln Riley's getting fired. I don't think a Ryan Day's getting fired. But in this NIL portal world, fans are less patient than they have been in the past. And I'll tell you, I just think a lot of stuff is going to change quickly. And I think some of these jobs that don't appear like they're going to open are probably going to. So with that said, let's get into some of the ones that are certainly hot seat material. And listen, the big one is the one that everybody knows. It is, of course, Florida and Billy Napier. And it's wild because I really kind of have like two different takes on Billy Napier. I think two things with Billy Napier can be true. It's funny. I do have a lawyer friend, actually a guy that frankly looks at a lot of the contracts for the stuff that we do with AT Media. He is a Florida grad. We talk, business a lot, but we talk football a lot. And with Billy Napier, you look at it from the positive and the negative. Comes in 2021. It's not an easy time. It's a different era of college football, the dawn of the NIL portal era. And if Billy Napier comes in 2001 or 1999 or even 2009, I think he's probably a pretty good coach at Florida. He's about culture. He's about time. He's about building, bringing those freshman classes in. Well, we don't live in that world anymore. And so you look at Billy Napier, I think that seat is scorching as he is sitting at right now, coming off of a 5-7 year last year, 6-7 the season before. And at Florida, that simply isn't good enough, right? And so when I look at Billy Napier, again, two things can be true. I don't think he's terrible. I do think the team is going to be improved. But I also think that the record so far isn't good enough. And I'm also tired of the excuses of, the administration, but the Billy Napier Florida administration, you can't totally blame them, right? Because for people who are Billy Napier defenders, they'll tell you, Florida's administration's been kind of a mess over the last couple years. They've had 4 different head coaches now since Urban Meyer was the head coach. And the bottom line is that, it hasn't always been pretty. Yeah, Scott Strickland maybe isn't exactly, in the running for AD of the year. But when I look at Florida, besides just the back-to-back losing seasons, what also stands out, and we've talked about this a lot, is the manner in which they lose games is not only frustrating to Florida fans, it's frustrating to all of us, right? Like, it's one thing if you're just losing games because you're simply not good enough. But that's not the case at Florida. Year 1, you lose to Vanderbilt. Last year, just think about some of the losses, and not just the losses themselves, but the circumstances around them. You lose to Arkansas. Arkansas's only SEC win all year, and it comes a week after they put up 3 points in a 7-3 loss to Mississippi State. That's just embarrassing. And that has nothing to do with the administration. That has nothing to do with the AD. That's on the coach and the coaching staff. By the way, they were at home. Beyond that, think about the Kentucky game. Listen, Kentucky has largely dominated that series the last 3-4 years. But for Kentucky to punk Florida at the line of scrimmage, for Kentucky to rush for 329 yards on the ground, Ray Davis, 280 yards rushing, that's embarrassing for Florida. LSU, I know Jaden Daniels won the Heisman. Jaden Daniels basically won the Heisman The night they played Florida, 606 yards of total offense. I remember talking about it on this show. So the losses are embarrassing. And beyond that, some of the off the field stuff is too. Listen, you don't need me to tell you. Florida is being sued right now by a former 5-star recruit, Jaden Rashada, who's now at Georgia. That's embarrassing for the school. Don't blame the administration. Don't blame NIL. That's one that falls on the head coach. You got to have your ducks in a row. That's inexcusable. By the way, beyond that, you look at some of the other stuff that's gone on. There's just been all sorts of weird stuff. The 2024 class completely falls apart right before National Signing Day. You lose 4, 5, 6 guys. So with Florida, it's been up, it's been down, and that's where Billy Napier is right now as a head coach. Now, I've obviously talked about a lot of the negative, but I do think it's worth at least mentioning the positives here a little bit with Billy Napier. And the positives, by the way, aren't like amazing, but one, I will say, a lot of times with this hot seat stuff, feels like a fan base has turned on a coach, feels like an administration has turned on a coach. I don't really get the sense that that's necessarily the case when it comes to Billy Napier in Florida. One, I think the fans, the most vocal fans, anyway, a lot of times the most vocal fans are negative. I think a lot of the most vocal fans at Florida are positive. I think a lot of the most vocal fans are the ones saying, you guys need to calm down, give this guy some time. Two, there's some weird, kind of interesting stuff going on with the administration. A little bit sad, actually, if we're being perfectly honest. It's that Florida's school president recently actually stepped away from the position because, unfortunately, it sounds like he's got some family problems. His wife is sick. He's taking care of her. But I bring it up because Florida right now has an interim school president. Anyone who knows anything about Florida, I mentioned it a minute ago. Their AD, Scott Strickland, has been very good. And so if you're going to fire Billy Napier, you're probably going to have to fire Scott Strickland as well. And so that kind of actually weirdly works in Billy Napier's favor. Is an interim school president going to fire an AD and a head coach come in and clean house? And even if you hire a school president, is that something a school president is going to want to do in the first 2 or 3 months on the job? So you have that positive working for you. I think most people want to see Billy Napier succeed. I think most Florida fans are hoping that he's the guy because they don't want to go through another coaching change. But I also think what's kind of interesting with Billy Napier is the schedule, right? And one thing I will give him credit for, the schedule is impossible. Okay, I think anybody who's listening to this show understands the schedule is the toughest in college football, in my opinion, bar none. 8 top 25 teams on that schedule. The last 5 games of the year are all against teams ranked in the top 25. But at the same time, you can look at that as a negative. I give Billy Napier credit. He has said nothing. It's nothing but a positive. We want to prove that we're on our way back. We want to prove that we are a better football team than we were a year ago and 2 years ago. And we have a great opportunity to do that. And so with Florida, what I find interesting, and I can be guilty of this, I think all college football fans are a little bit guilty of it. I think with Florida, you can be a little fatalist with the schedule, right? You look at the schedule and it looks impossible. And maybe in some ways it is. I mean, it is kind of crazy. You open with Miami. Week 2, you play Texas A&M at home. A few weeks after that, you play Tennessee on the road. And that's the easy part of the schedule. Doesn't include a Kentucky team that has given you fits the last couple of years. Doesn't include a road trip to Mississippi State. But that's the easy part of the schedule that doesn't include the insane Final 5, which is Georgia on a neutral, Texas on the road, LSU at home, Ole Miss at home, and then, of course, Florida State to wrap the year. The good news for Billy Napier, though, if he's good enough, he's going to have a chance to prove it. And I do think we all look at that schedule as nothing but a negative. As, well, you know, I mean, if he loses to Miami and he loses to A&M, and it's like, but what if he doesn't, though? Like, Miami's coming in, new starting quarterback, Cam Ward, has had fumble problems in his career. What if Florida wins that game at home in front of 90,000 of their own fans? Mike Elko, Texas A&M, I love the hire. I think they're going to be really good. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, what if A&M beats Notre Dame in week 1? Now 2 weeks later, you're 2-0. They play some FCS team in week 2. Now you got to go on the road to Florida. Everybody's telling you how great you are. Jimbo was the problem, whatever. Now, again, you got to go to the Swamp in front of a 100,000 fans. Florida State by the end of the year, what are they going to be? Do we believe in DJU? By the way, LSU, they're replacing everybody off last year's team on the offensive side of the football, and the defense was terrible. So I could go on and on. But one thing that I didn't mention off the top, I do think that what I'm going to do is, as I talk about these big names, kind of give that confidence level or lack of confidence level in what happens with these head coaches. And I think Billy Napier right now, and I'm not even a Billy Napier guy, but I think if I look at him right now, what I see is a guy, the administration, I think, wants to keep him. I think they want to find a way. And I think he can win enough of those coin toss games. Maybe a Miami at home. I know I picked Miami last week to make the playoff as the ACC champion. Doesn't mean they can't lose at the Swamp. Can they beat Florida State on the road? Can they maybe win one of those toss-up games that looks like it should be a loss, but maybe it isn't? Maybe LSU isn't as good. You go on and on down the list. I'm going to give Billy Napier a confidence level of like a 5.5 in terms of a 0 being there's no way he gets fired, 100%, or a 10 being there's no way he comes back. I'll say about a 5.5. I think he does enough to potentially get another year, but I will tell you, you got to start fast. Billy Napier, if I give you a piece of advice, don't lose to Miami at home. You're a slight underdog the last time I checked. By the way, we'll have our full week 1 preview next week. I got to tell you that we got a loaded freaking slate, and this is, to me, one of the most important games, but we got plenty of time to preview that. With that said, let's keep it going on the hot seat list. Let's get to the other big name, in my opinion, that is on the hot seat. Certainly the biggest name in the SEC outside of Billy Napier. That's the pit boss, my main man, Sam Pittman. Sam Pittman, really kind of an interesting story for him at Arkansas, okay? Because when you look at the start of things at Arkansas, what was the old, Ice Cube song? It was all good just a week ago. Feels like it was all just good for Sam Pittman just a few years ago. You start off, you come in that first COVID year. Remember, Arkansas was coming off back-to-back seasons in which they did not win an SEC game, if my memory serves me correct. Chad Morris was really freaking bad, by the way. But you go 3-7 in your first year. Then you go 9-4. I think a lot of people forget that. But from there, you go 7-6. You barely win a bowl game against Kansas. It was a crazy shootout. What was it, like a 55-54 final score? And then last year, obviously, the bottom fell out at 4-8 overall. So it's an interesting deal with Sam Pittman. I think what's interesting to me, it felt like, was he even going to get this year? It felt like things got so bad down the stretch, but they give him another year. But what's also interesting and what is also true, he got a little bit of the benefit of the doubt by hiring Bobby Petrino as his offensive coordinator. And it's wild. I know I've told this story on this show a million times, but I was in Fayetteville. I was at Arkansas when they hired Bobby Petrino. It was the week of the Duke-Arkansas basketball game, early December. And I will tell you, the Duke game was great. The fans stormed the court, but the crowd, all they wanted to do was get a glimpse of Bobby freaking Petrino, who was in the building that night being introduced as the offensive coordinator. And so I keep going back to it, but all you heard all night long, we want Bobby, we want Bobby. Like, the fans clearly love the guy. I think, to Sam Pittman's credit, I don't even think Sam Pittman necessarily wanted to hire Bobby Petrino. I think he was maybe told he had to. But independent of that, what's also interesting to me is that did buy him some goodwill. And as importantly, this offense should be really interesting. And listen, I'm not a camp report guy. I'm not going to go team by team, whatever. The one thing I can't tell you, there are a lot of people at Arkansas that say their quarterback, Talon Green, the transfer from Boise State, has maybe been a little bit better than they were expecting so far in fall camp, and even since the spring, since he came. Because you look at this guy, I mean, he was kind of a crazy athlete, had a good season a year ago, all of that, but actually kind of sort of regressed last year. His best season probably was that 2022 season. Higher completion percentage, more touchdowns, fewer interceptions. Last year, 11 passing touchdowns, 9 rushing touchdowns. Everybody says he has looked really good under Bobby Petrino. So that's the good news if you're Sam Pittman. You probably made the right offensive coordinator hire. You probably got the right quarterback out of the portal. And it is worth noting on Arkansas. Like, people forget this. They went 4-8 last year. And on top of that, by the way, we got 1 million Arkansas fans that watch this show. Hop in the comment section. Tell me if I'm an idiot. Tell me if I'm totally wrong. But the vibe that I get is that there's kind of some quiet optimism that this team could maybe be a little bit better after being picked to finish 14th in the league in the preseason poll. So you have talent. The other thing I was going to say, and I kind of tripped over my own words, but Arkansas last year, they went 4-8. What's easy to forget, they lost a lot of close games. 5 games by a touchdown or less. And it wasn't just that they lost 5 games by a touchdown or less, but what was as interesting, it was against some of the best teams on the schedule, okay? 3-point loss to LSU, essentially a walk-off field goal. 7-point loss to Ole Miss, at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is a really good team. Alabama, you lost by 3. Now, that was a weird one. Alabama was way up, kind of took their foot off the gas, whatever. The point I'm trying to make, that season, you could have gone from 4-8 to 7-5 really quickly with a couple breaks your way. So that's the positive for Sam Pittman. But bluntly, I think there's some negatives that would concern me, that would keep me up at night if I was him. Not only is the schedule tough, now it's not impossible by SEC standards. One of the few teams, by the way, that does not play Georgia or Alabama. So that's the positive. The negative, though, is it is tough. It is tough early, and there are a lot of tough games away from Fayetteville early in the year. Now, listen, I understand that in this SEC world, nobody has an easy slate anymore, but just look at this Arkansas schedule. At Oklahoma State in week 2. Oklahoma State's a preseason top 20 team. They won 10 games last year. Then you get UAB at home. Then at Auburn. Then Texas A&M on a neutral. Then Tennessee at home the first week of October. And that's heading into your bye. And then it actually gets tougher after the bye because you still got LSU, you still got Ole Miss, you still got Texas, and you still got Missouri. So again, it's kind of that Billy Napier corollary that we just talked about. You could look at it as a positive. You could look at it as a negative. Sam Pittman is certainly going to have his chances, but new offensive coordinator, new offense, new quarterback, and that schedule is really tough early. And I'm just here to tell you, I remember right before we went on break, we had an Arkansas fan in the chat ask what my expectations were of that team. And what I said is, and this isn't rocket science, this isn't like some crazy amazing take, is you can't be 2-4 going into your bye, because if you're 2-4 going into your bye, and again, at Oklahoma State, at Auburn, which Kirby Smart just said is one of the toughest places in college football to play, Texas A&M on a neutral in Dallas, and of course, Tennessee at home. If you're 2-4, I think it's pretty hard to justify bringing back Sam Pittman after the bye. Now, do we get interim head coach Bobby Petrino? That I don't know. I tend to think that T. Will, the defensive coordinator, would probably be the interim head coach. But the bottom line is, if you're 2-4, I don't think that Sam Pittman's coming back. And here's the crazy part. And this was something I forgot, and I was kind of doing some homework over the weekend. Sam Pittman's got this wild clause in his buyout that actually, essentially, if he gets a different buyout if he is over 500 versus if he's under 500. And so what's interesting to me about Sam Pittman is you start 2-4, the school is actually incentivized to pull the plug right there. The last thing they need is for you to get hot the second half of the year in a scenario where now all of a sudden, even if they want to get rid of you, they're going to have to pay you more. So that's the interesting thing about Arkansas. And one more thing, of course, in true Torres fashion, I'm already going way, way, way long on all of this. But what I do find interesting about Arkansas is something that I've heard from the fans and the people around that program, really, I think over the last 6 or 7 months, is that I think that John Calipari, yes, we're talking basketball now, but I'm going to get back to football in a minute. I think John Calipari has opened the eyes of Arkansas fans about how unique their setup is in this NIL world, okay? We know it's an NIL world. Even with revenue sharing coming, I get that it's going to be a different landscape. But at the same time, even with revenue sharing, you're still going to need money from boosters, whatever. You're still going to need a collective. Collectives aren't going away. Their importance might be decreased a little bit. You're still going to need that collective, though, to help, with the NIL situation. And so what I think John Calipari has kind of uncovered at Arkansas is when you can get all those boosters in the same direction in a state where there are no other FBS, I should say Power 4 football programs, no Power 4 programs in general, not just football, but across sports. And there's no professional teams. And so everybody's pulling in the same direction. All the businesses want to see you succeed. And to bring it back to football, I've talked to a couple, I wouldn't call them high level boosters. I'm not talking about John Tyson here, but I've talked to a couple Arkansas people that are like, we think that this job in this NIL world is now way more appealing than it was even 3 or 4 years ago when Sam Pittman took the job. And I think there's a lot of Arkansas fans that are curious. If this job opened with the NIL setup that we have, I'm not saying there's a John Calipari out there that's going to leave, as a Hall of Famer to come to Arkansas. But is there a guy at a ACC school, a Big 12 school, maybe even like a Big 10 school, like one of those second, third tier Big 10 teams that's like, I think I'm a pretty good coach, but I don't have the resources. I got no chance to compete here. Let me go somewhere where I can compete. And so I look at Arkansas. I think it's a very, very, very interesting setup. And I think because of it, I don't want to say as much administrative support, but I don't think there's as much of a thirst for Sam Pittman to come back. I know I said Billy Napier like a 5.5 in terms of, do I expect him to come back? Do I not? Well, I will say, I think Sam Pittman's like an 8 in terms of 0 being, I think he's 100% back, 10 being his seat is on fire. There's 0% that chance that he's coming back. I'd put it at an 8 that he's back. Really quickly, we're going plenty long on this first segment. I do want to get to some other news and notes of college basketball. A couple other names to keep an eye on in the coaching or the hot seat stuff. Dave Aranda at Baylor, kind of a wild time at Baylor. Went 2-7 that first COVID year, then goes 12-2, wins the Big 12. Last 2 years, 6-7, 3-9. And so it's trending in the wrong direction. Listen, there's a direct corollary between Matt Rule's players leaving Baylor after that Big 12 title run and the program kind of falling off. And so the program's heading in the wrong direction. Now, what's interesting is a few things. You can look at it as a positive and a negative. Positive is he got a big extension after that 12-2 season. That was the year the LSU job opened, and everybody got paid off that LSU job. James Franklin got paid. A couple other guys got paid. Dave Aranda was one of them. Because it's a private school, we don't know his buyout. But the other thing that's interesting to me about Baylor, we have seen the T-shirts, right? We've seen the T-shirts of the We Pay Players T-shirts. And I think it was cute. I think it was funny. I think the internet got a kick out of it. What I will tell you is it is no secret that Baylor has significantly upped their NIL game over the last couple months, probably about the last year or so, which is great. The counter to that is you got to win. And I think that's something we're going to see increasingly more and more, is that as boosters are spread thinner, as they're asked to give more, and many of you, the listening, are boosters in some way, shape, or form. I think as boosters are asked to give more, the reality is going to kick in that coaches have a shorter and shorter leash. In other words, if you're going to be asking for millions of dollars, not only for facilities, not only for your own salary, not only for your assistant coaches, but now to pay players, fans can see on the field who's good and who's not. And so it's like, it's one thing if you're asking for money for a facility, the fans never see it. They don't know if it actually matters or not. But that right tackle that you told everybody you had to have, well, guess what? If you get him and you're paying him and that booster knows that his money went towards that player or this player or whomever, they want to see results on the field. So I think Baylor is in an interesting spot simply because I just think the schedule is too tough. 4 of the first 6 at home, 4 of the first 6 on the road, 2 of the last 3 on the road. So they could start slow. They could fall behind the 8 ball. I don't like Dave Aranda's chances of surviving. I think Clark Lee at Vanderbilt's an interesting one. I know that Vandy is probably the toughest job in all of college football. Certainly in the Power 4, it is the toughest job. But at the same time, you went 2-10 year 1, then 5-7, back to 2-10. You go winless in the SEC this year. You go 2-10, 3-9. I think it's kind of hard to sell that the program is in the right direction. And I think the bigger concern is a couple things. One, they basically lost all their best players to the portal this year. Will Shepard, their leading receiver, transferred to Colorado. A.J. Swan, their starting quarterback, transferred to LSU to be a backup. They just don't have a lot of dudes, and it's not the kind of school that you can just backfill with a million transfers. So Vanderbilt's one. I'll give you one that I think to me is a little bit off the radar, but interesting. South Carolina, I'm not sold that Shane Beamer's the guy. And you really take out that 2-week run when he beat Tennessee and Clemson back-to-back that second year, hasn't been very good. 7-6 year one. They did end up 8-5 in year two, but remember, they were 6-4 going into the final 2 games of the season before they pulled off 2 miracles. 5-7 last year, and you look at the schedule this year, I think it's going to be hard to see the scenario where South Carolina is better. I really do think that Shane Beamer is a guy that, in my opinion, I think if it goes really sideways, he's not one that's on anybody's radar right now. You go like 4-8 this year after going 5-7 last year. We'll see if you get another year. Tell you what, producer Matt, let's go ahead and take a quick break. We'll come back, hit on just a couple other odds and ends from the football world. Had that technical difficulty early in the show, kind of threw me off the whole show. Anyway, come back, do talk some odds and ends from football, but I want to get to a big basketball recruiting update. Jasper Johnson, 5-star. I think there's a very interesting development emerging with him. Quick break. Be right back. Before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So just want to hit on a few smaller things from over the course of the time that I was gone. Then I do want to get to that basketball update. This segment, I think, will probably just take a minute or two before we get to the basketball that I know a lot of you are interested in learning about. By the way, I appreciate everybody tuning in on a Sunday in August. I think the plan will be starting next week. It's full speed ahead with football. We'll probably be doing every Sunday night at some point going live so that for those of you who do listen to the podcast, you can obviously have it on your phones late Sunday, early Monday. Cannot believe it feels like just yesterday. It was like the Final Four is over. Mark Pope's doing his press conference at Rupp Arena. What are we going to talk about? Here we are now, a week from week 0. A week from today, we'll be breaking down games on this show, which is crazy. With that said, a couple other notes from the football world while I was gone. The first one I think that's sort of significant. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this. Will Howard named starting quarterback at Ohio State. Listen, to me, not surprising. Ohio State's kind of wild. We talked about it. 5 quarterbacks in that quarterback room that are sort of good enough to start. Will Howard, obviously, the transfer from K-State. Yeah, Devin Brown, who was the backup last year, who briefly won the starting job going into the bowl game. He gets hurt. Keinholz is the backup to the backup. He's still there. And then you bring in 2 5-star freshmen in Aaron Noland and Julian Sayin, who came over after Nick Saban, of course, retired at Alabama. So Will Howard's the guy. But why I'm not surprised is it's pretty straightforward, is that you have a team that is built to win. All the chips are in the middle. You had 4 or 5 guys end up coming back to Ohio State this year that could have gone pro. And we've talked about them all offseason, but Travion Henderson, leading rusher, Emeka Ibuka, second leading wide receiver behind Marvin Harrison Jr. You had JT Tuimoloau, a bunch of defensive players that decided to come back. You spent all this money on Chip Kelly. It's go time. And so while I don't think Will Howard is the highest upside of all the guys in that room, certainly probably gives you the most confidence going into a season where, as we said to lead the show, like Ryan Day has got to win, and he's got to win now, and there's no excuses. You got to get the job done. And so I don't think Will Howard really raises the ceiling of Ohio State, but I don't think he has to. There's so much talent around him. Just hand the ball off to Quinshon Judkins. Hand the ball off to Travion Henderson. Short, you don't have to be Josh Allen. Just get the ball to Jeremiah Smith, the number 1 recruit in America, get out of the way. Carnell Tate, get out of the way. Emeka Ibuka, get out of the way. Will Howard named the starter. But I will tell you, we'll be talking a lot of Ohio State on this show. They are as fascinating of a program as anyone in college football to me. You look at the schedule, there's no excuses. 4 of the first 5 are at home. Only road game is at Michigan State. Now, I think Iowa is maybe a little bit better than people think, but you should be 5-0 going into the game at Oregon on October 12th. Then you got Penn State a few weeks later, which is a program that you have largely dominated, and then it's Michigan. I would say on paper, the only team that comes anywhere close to matching Ohio State in terms of actual talent is the Oregon Ducks. I think Michigan and Penn State both a step behind this year. There are no excuses. Ryan Howard was the baseball player. Ryan Day names his starter, and I will give him credit, is I think it was a move out of respect to all those guys. Let's be honest. 1, I think he probably didn't name a starter after spring to make sure none of them transferred. But 2, you just have to name the starter so you can start getting your guy ready with first-team reps. I think even if you go back to last year, they really took the quarterback competition into the season, if you remember. Kyle McCord played some, Devin Brown played some, and by week 3, week 4, you basically didn't have a quarterback when the games really started to count. So I don't blame Ryan Day, but that was probably the biggest piece of news. A couple really disappointing injury notes. Reuben Owens, former 5-star running back at Texas A&M, I believe it's a foot injury. I think it was initially diagnosed as like a knee thing or something like that. But he's out. Good news is that Texas A&M, that is a place where they have depth. Le'Veon Moss is back. A couple other guys are back with experience. But it just feels like a weird year where there's more injuries than normal, like really impactful injuries. CJ Baxter, the running back at Texas, is hurt and out for the year. Notre Dame lost one of their key offensive linemen going into the season. So strange fall, a lot of injuries. Hope there's nothing major. That was kind of the big stuff that happened while I was gone. Also worth noting, by the way, and again, another thing that we don't have to necessarily spend a ton of time on, but Tennessee can't stop picking up 5-stars. And we talked, I think it was 2 weeks ago, about Tennessee basically landing 3 5-star quarterbacks in a 4-cycle class. Nico Imamalieva in the 23 class, George McIntyre in the 25 class, and then Faison Brandon in the 26 class, the number 1 recruit in America in 26. But I bring it up because over the weekend, another big commitment for Tennessee, literally and figuratively, as David Sanders, number 1 offensive tackle in all of high school football, commits to Tennessee. And when I think about this piece of news, what stands out to me is what I said a few weeks ago, is that Josh Heupel is just the right guy at the right time with the right scheme at Tennessee. And it is a credit to him. It is worth noting, by the way, there's never been a reason why Tennessee couldn't recruit at a high level. Just think they had the wrong coaches in place, with no disrespect intended towards Derek Dooley or Butch Jones or whomever. But the blueprint's been there. Tennessee is a growing state in terms of population, but what always stands out to me about Tennessee, when they've been at their best, back to the Phil Fulmer days, they recruited North Carolina really well. They recruited South Carolina really well. They recruited Georgia really well. Obviously, all states right in that area. Well, what ended up happening? First of all, South Carolina, remember, got really good for a few years. Harder to recruit South Carolina. Then Clemson got really good. Remember, by the way, Trevor Lawrence grew up a Tennessee fan, but he ends up going to Clemson because it was a better option at that time. So I'm just giving examples of North Carolina, by the way, for a few years under Mac Brown became a destination spot for elite recruits in that state. Well, now Josh Heupel has put the product on the field. I said it a few weeks ago. Credit to Danny White, the AD, who basically, when he came in, he said, we're not playing boring football anymore. You're going to be excited to show up to the stadium. It's going to be fun. You're going to have a blast watching us, and we're going to win games. Hires Josh Heupel. That Hendon Hooker season, I think, changed everything. You get Nico. Now there's a lot of enthusiasm. Now guys can see the blueprint, can see the ability to win. Yes, I'm sure NIL plays some role, but let me say this really quick. Can we stop with just everything is NIL related? Because I guarantee you, number one offensive tackle in the country who chose Tennessee over Ohio State and Nebraska, I'm here to promise you, whatever Tennessee offered at NIL, Nebraska and Ohio State could have matched if he wanted to go there. So let's not diminish what Tennessee did. Let's give them credit. Another big piece of recruiting news. I believe they're right around a top 5 class in the country. By the way, it's kind of crazy. I looked at 24/7 Sports the other day. I believe 7 of the top 8 classes right now for 2025 are all in the SEC. Some not surprising. Bama at number 2, Georgia at number 3, LSU is up there. Worth noting, Auburn's 5, Tennessee 6, I believe. Ohio State, the only one not in the SEC. So SEC recruiting does not stop. Tennessee picks up a 5-star, and good weekend for them. By the way, really quickly, I know we all want to get to basketball. Really enjoyed the NFL, but like I landed at the airport on Saturday, and there was preseason football on. I was loving the NFL football preseason. Watched a little bit of Caleb Williams. Listen, Caleb Williams is going to be awesome. We don't have to start breaking down NFL right now, but this was a guy I was told during the draft cycle was overrated. You know, he counted for 41 touchdowns last year, 30 passing, 11 rushing, 69% completion percentage. If that guy's bad, by the way, with the worst defense in the FBS, basically, with a terrible O-line, if that guy is as bad as you guys are telling me, I think every quarterback in America wishes they were going to be bad, but he looked awesome. Malik Neighbors looked good. I kind of inadvertently started a Malik Neighbors discourse on the internet because I basically said last year he was better than Marvin Harrison and didn't get any credit for it. I stand by what I said. But yeah, Malik Neighbors stood out. Justin Fields, even though Pittsburgh didn't score a lot of points, kind of looked interesting in Pittsburgh. So anyway, football's here. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, and I could not be more excited. All right, really quickly before we get out of here, because I know that's what a lot of people have come in here and are waiting for. Do want to go ahead and update a very interesting piece of basketball recruiting news. And again, we're not going to talk a ton of basketball going forward, but when there's big recruiting news this time of year, we got to hit on it. And there has been some major news with the University of Kentucky. So if you've been paying attention to the podcast feed to the YouTube channel, on Friday, Kentucky got a commitment from a kid named Malachi Moreno, 4-star center from the state of Kentucky, top 25 prospect in America, okay? I did a live reaction from vacation. We talked about it a little bit. And by the way, if you missed it, go back and watch it. We're not going to rehash it here, but it was kind of a very important commitment for Mark Pope. Local kid, you don't want to miss out on him. It would have been a bad look. It just would have been a bad look if you missed on him. But to Mark Pope's credit, comes in, gets the job done. He's being recruited by Indiana and some of the other big name schools, and Mark Pope gets it done. Why it's interesting, though, is because as soon as the commitment happened, a bunch of Kentucky fans hit me up in the YouTube chat and the YouTube comments, whatever. And they said, Torres, this is great, but tell us about Jasper Johnson. Is Jasper Johnson a 5-star guard originally from Kentucky who, oh, by the way, is supposed to commit this month? Is he going to end up a Wildcat as well? We love Malachi Moreno. By the way, Malachi Moreno was asked about Jasper Johnson at his announcement and said, oh, I got a list, and Jasper Johnson's at the top. But a ton of you have asked. Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. And let me start by saying this. We did a Jasper Johnson update. I forget if it was a YouTube exclusive or if it was on the podcast as well, about 4 or 5 weeks ago when he cut his list. I think he cut his list early August, so maybe it was 3 weeks ago. And I said that I believe that Kentucky at that time was a distant third behind Alabama, and North Carolina. Cut his list to 5. It was Alabama, North Carolina, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Louisville. Arkansas isn't recruiting him. I don't think Louisville has a shot. And at the time I said, it's Alabama, UNC in one way or the other, and Kentucky in a distant third. But what I can tell you, got home, started to look at into this, started to make some calls. Johnson, really good player. He's been a high-profile player in this 25 class forever. Started his career in the state of Kentucky. His father played football at Kentucky. His grandfather had ties to the University of Kentucky as well. So he's been a known commodity forever, and was really highly recruited by John Calipari when John Calipari was there. John Calipari leaves, and the recruitment starts to kind of slow down a little bit. Jasper Johnson, other schools emerged. They've had longer relationships. Mark Pope hasn't really gotten to know him. And that's where it was, like I said, as of a few weeks ago. By the way, should mention lefty, 6'4", really, really, really talented. 3-level scorer. He can get to the rim, can finish at the rim, good body control. Obviously, look, his dad played major college football. He's kind of strong, wiry strong. So every time I watch him, I like him. He could be a little bit ball dominant at times, but listen, you play with other good players, it's going to work itself out. And he's certainly going to play with other good players in college. Well, I bring it up because, as I said, when I left for vacation, we did this maybe the first week of August when he cut his list. It was late July, early August. And at the time, like I said, I thought Carolina and Alabama were in the lead. And the reasons why were pretty simple. Is one, I think it was really 2 or 3 things. First off, like I said, Bama and Carolina just had more time to build a relationship with the kid. Kid had a relationship with John Calipari. John Calipari leaves for Arkansas. Arkansas prioritizes different kids. That's okay. So Arkansas is off the list. And with Mark Pope, he's just kind of this new guy nobody really knows much about coming from the West Coast. Now, you know about him. I know about him, but I'm talking about a 5-star recruit who didn't even play high school in Kentucky last year, played at Link Academy in Missouri. And so I don't think he really knew much about him. Don't think he knew much about the offense, much about the system, much about whatever, and had a longer time to build the relationships with Alabama, with North Carolina, with some other schools. Beyond that, and this was a talking point certainly 2 or 3 weeks ago when I left, NIL was a factor. And I think Mark Pope kind of felt like, okay, I got a budget. I like this kid, but if some school is going to offer him some crazy number, am I going to blow my budget in August of 2024? He won't even get to campus until May of 2025. And I got 7 or 8 seniors on this roster that I'm going to have to replace. So if I spend all my NIL money here, how does it end up working out for the rest of the roster? I can't be tying up all of my money with one kid, and certainly a freshman, even if he's really good as a 5-star. And so I bring it up because when I left, that's kind of the vibes that I was getting. And like I said, I think Alabama, North Carolina felt good. Well, what I can say is over the last 2 or 3 weeks, it just feels like a lot has changed. Okay. First of all, a couple things stand out. One, I think the relationship has gotten stronger. Now I know Jasper Johnson was away this particular weekend. He was out in Phoenix at one of the big events. But at the same time, I think the relationship has just gotten stronger. He spent some more time in Lexington over the summer. He was at that TBT event. He took a visit in June. I think he kind of got to really know the staff. But I think as importantly, not just Mark Pope, I think he's gotten to know some of the assistant coaches. Alvin Brooks is a great assistant coach, a great recruiter. Jason Hart is a great assistant coach, a great recruiter. And so I think from Jasper Johnson's point of view, I think he's certainly become more comfortable with that staff, more comfortable with that program. Again, grew up his entire life, quite literally, almost literally. John Calipari is the head coach. It's all he knew. Calipari leaves. He doesn't know what to think. Well, now he's familiar with that staff. He's familiar with what they're about. I think beyond that, and this is interesting, I think there's a little bit of internal state pressure on both sides. Like I said, Jasper Johnson, I know he doesn't live in Kentucky anymore, but I think he feels that if you want to call it pressure, I don't think pressure has to be a negative. I think it could be a positive of like, these people really want me. And I kind of understand that I can come here, kind of be one of the faces of a rebuild, a reload, and not, it's just different being a Kentucky kid. And I think he probably saw what happened with Reed Sheppard over the last year and the NIL opportunities and how you are adored if you are a Kentucky fan, if you're a Kentucky player in Kentucky. And by the way, you don't have to do it alone. Malachi Moreno's coming. You're going to have a couple guys that are already on the roster there. And so I just think he's become more comfortable with the situation. From Mark Pope's perspective, I think there's a couple things from his perspective as well. I think it's another one where he's felt a little bit of the quote-unquote pressure. And I don't think it's negative. That's not a shot at Kentucky fans. I think Kentucky fans have just made it clear. This is a kid that we really want, and this is a kid that we would love to cheer for at Rupp Arena running out of that tunnel. And I think from Mark Pope's perspective, I think a few things have been clarified. One, I think it's clear that they like him. I think he's probably understood this is kind of an important recruit. Like, I don't want to lose this kid because I didn't do everything that I could to get him. And so I think that relationship has kind of been expedited. And then I've also heard behind the scenes, maybe some of the NIL stuff got, I don't want to say straightened out, but, you know, it's in a better place, right? Where maybe 6 weeks ago, Mark Pope felt like I can't spend all this money on this one kid. And I think the Kentucky administration and the collective people have kind of let him know, like, dude, don't lose this kid over money. If it's over a couple, you know, I hate to say it like this, but if it's over a couple $100,000, we'll figure it out at some point. But, you know, whatever your budget was, if you need to go a little bit over, we can probably make an exception for this kid. His family has ties to the school. The kid has ties to the state. It makes just sense if we're going to overspend, if you will. Let's do it on a kid from the local area, 5-star kid, rather than somebody who's whatever. He's from Arizona or California or Minnesota or whatever. So it feels like it's changed. It feels like the NIL has changed. It feels like the pressure's ratcheted up in state. Malachi Moreno, again, publicly talking about it. And what I will also say, and this to me is where it's interesting, I've talked to some people at some of those other schools, and I think the attitude even from those other schools has changed as well, where it's like, I think there were a lot of people from the Alabama perspective. I think they really thought 2 weeks ago, again, 3 weeks ago, this is ours to lose. Well, sending out some texts to the Bama folks, to the North Carolina folks, to whatever. I think it's gone from he's ours to lose to kind of, instead of that, it's maybe we're not going to give up. We're not going down without a fight. But the confidence and excitement that was maybe there 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think there's a little trepidation that maybe this Mark Pope guy and his staff are making a move. So I don't think it's done yet. But the one thing I will say, I would keep an eye out on if Jasper Johnson sets a commitment date soon. As we're recording here Sunday night, it's about 7 o'clock Eastern time. I don't believe a commitment date has been set yet, but I just bring it up because this is a situation where he said he wanted to commit by the end of August. He said he wanted to commit by the end of his senior year. And I think the sooner he sets a commitment date, it's actually, I feel like, the better for Kentucky. If you had asked me a month ago, I would have said I would have worried, but it feels like all the momentum's with Kentucky. A lot of the schools that are recruiting him admit that they've lost some momentum. And so let's see if over the next 24, 48, 36 hours, whatever it is, he sets a commitment date. And then from there, we'll see what happens. Don't think it's done. Don't think it's 100%. I can tell you this time of year, sometimes a kid will silently commit. He'll want to wait till a visit, or he'll want to wait till something to announce his decision. I don't believe that we're there yet with Jasper Johnson. But if you had asked me 3 weeks ago, I would have said I think Bama's the favorite. I feel confident saying even if it's 51-49, 53-47, 55-45, I do think Kentucky is now in the lead. So we'll see what happens. We'll see if Mark Pope can close the deal. But a fascinating recruitment. And again, it comes on the heels. The Malachi Moreno stuff was fascinating to watch because everybody was excited, but everybody kind of thought, is this the tip of the iceberg? Is this the first domino? And I think bluntly, it just might be. Really quickly, producer Matt, before we get out of here, any intriguing questions, or is it just mostly scuttlebutt in the chat? Everybody's probably just arguing. I know that tends to happen sometimes here in this chat, but do appreciate everybody tuning in. Again, I think it's a great crowd for a Sunday in August. And as I said, whether you're listening on podcast or YouTube, it really is full speed ahead. I'm excited to be back. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be with you guys. I appreciate everybody grinding with us through the fall or through the spring and summer when there isn't as much going on. Here's the good news. We have a lot to talk about here in the coming weeks, okay? So the plan is going forward, we'll probably go back to recording the streams on Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. The show will be in your feed no later than Monday morning, Wednesday morning, Friday morning. And as I said, I think it's going to be mostly football going forward, okay? There will be basketball. I got some other basketball stuff that happened while I was gone that I want to get to maybe on a future show, but it's a lot of football. Week 0 is here. Week 0 is here. Georgia Tech, Florida State. Cannot wait. We'll talk about that game later in the week. And then next week, it's full speed ahead where we are previewing games, and I am so fired up for that. All right, I think it is time for me to get out of here. Everybody do Torres a quick favor. If you are not subscribed to the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, make sure to do so. You can do it anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you get podcasts. Please make sure to subscribe. Make sure to rate and review the show. If you can do me a favor, go to the podcast page. Just drop a 5-star rating if you want to leave a quick review. Would appreciate your support. But yeah, football is here. I'm excited. Cannot wait. We got some big guests coming up as well. Boy, oh boy. Cannot wait. I'm so excited. Time for me to get out of here, though. Appreciate everybody's support. Appreciate people dealing with some technical glitches to start the show. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Shout out to Torrin Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. Shout out to all of you coming in on a Sunday night in August and still mid-August. Well, guess what? Football is here. Football is coming, and we are not slowing down anytime soon. Appreciate everybody's support. I will be back Tuesday night